Hey there! Tonight we're traveling back to one of history's darkest chapters. Not to the comfortable myths or romanticized images, but to the actual reality of medieval medicine during the Black Death. You'll experience what it was truly like to be a physician in 1348, when a third of Europe died in just a few years, and everything you'd learned about healing suddenly meant nothing. There were no beaked masks, no protective suits, just you, your threadbare robes, and a leather bag full of remedies that wouldn't work. If this kind of slow, immersive storytelling helps you relax and rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is. It's quietly comforting to know who else is out there falling asleep to the same tale. So, dim the lights, settle into the covers, and let's step into the world of the medieval plague physician. 1. The hiring. When death comes calling, the year is 1348. You are a physician, trained at one of Europe's great universities, Bologna, perhaps, or Montpellier, or Paris. You've spent 7 years studying the trivium and quadrivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, mathematics, music, geometry, and astronomy. Then another 3 years immersed in medical theory, studying the works of Hippocrates and Galen, learning about the four humors, memorizing herbal remedies in Latin, and practicing uroscopy, the art of diagnosing illness by examining a patient's urine. You've passed your examinations. You've been granted your license to practice. You are, by the standards of your time, among the most educated men in Christendom. And now, standing in your study on an autumn morning in 1348, you're being offered a contract that will almost certainly kill you. The messenger who brings it is pale, sweating despite the cool air. He keeps his distance, as if proximity alone might doom him. The parchment he extends bears the seal of the city council. You break the wax and read. The language is formal, almost ceremonial, but the meaning is blunt. The great mortality has reached your city. Physicians are desperately needed. The council requires your services immediately. Your fee will be generous 4 times your usual rate, paid monthly in advance. Paid in advance, because they don't expect you to survive long enough to collect it later. You look up from the parchment. The messenger won't meet your eyes. He's already backing toward the door, eager to be gone. You don't blame him. By accepting this contract, you're volunteering to walk into the pestilence itself, to lay your hands on the dying, to breathe the same air that's already claimed thousands. Many of your colleagues have already fled-packed their belongings in the dead of night and ridden hard for their country estates, as far from the infected cities as their horses could carry them. The old proverb echoes in your mind. Cito lunge tard. Flee quickly, go far, return slowly. But you don't flee. Perhaps it's duty. Perhaps it's pride. Perhaps you truly believe that your training, your knowledge of Galen and Avicenna, will protect you where others have failed. Or perhaps, and this is closer to the truth, you simply cannot bear the shame of running while others suffer. You sign the contract. The messenger snatches it from your hands and disappears so quickly you hear his boots clattering on the cobblestones before your door has fully closed. You stand alone in your study, surrounded by your books, your astrolabes, your carefully organized jars of herbs and powders. Everything you've studied, everything you've learned, everything you believe about the human body and how to heal it, all of it is about to be tested against an enemy you don't understand. You don't yet know that this enemy is Yersinia pestis, a bacterium carried by fleas on the backs of rats. You don't know about bacteria at all. The very concept of microorganisms won't exist for another 500 years. What you believe, what every educated physician in Europe believes, is that disease comes from an imbalance of the 4 humors blood: phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, or from miasma, the poisonous vapors that rise from rotting matter and corrupt the air. And so you begin to prepare, not with gloves or masks or protective gear. Those don't exist yet. Not for another 3 centuries, but with the tools of medieval medicine. You gather your instruments: a phlegm, The small blade used for bloodletting, its edge honed sharp. A set of cupping glasses for drawing out corrupted humors. A collection of leeches in a jar, though half of them are already dead. Strips of linen for bandages. A mortar and pestle. Your urine flask, the symbol of your profession. Packets of dried herbs. Rosemary, lavender, mint, wormwood, garlic, onion. A small quantity of theriac, that legendary cure-all made from dozens of ingredients, including powdered viper flesh, opium, and honey. A vial of 4 thieves' vinegar, named for the thieves who supposedly used it to protect themselves while robbing plague victims. A tiny quantity of crushed emerald powder, ruinously expensive, but some noble patients insist upon it. You pack everything into your leather satchel. The weight of it settles on your shoulder like a yoke. Before you leave, you write a letter to your family. If you have a wife, children, you write to them now, because you may not return. You write about duty, about the physician's calling, about the obligation to serve even in the face of death. You write that you love them. You don't write what you're really thinking, that you're terrified, that your hands are shaking as you form these letters, that you would give anything to be somewhere, anywhere else. You seal the letter. You take a deep breath. You step out into the street. The city has changed. It's only been a few weeks since the first cases appeared, but already the transformation is profound. The market square, usually bustling with vendors and shoppers, is nearly empty. The few people you see move quickly, heads down, avoiding each other. Shops are shuttered. A dog sniffs at something in an alley. You don't look closely enough to see what. The church bells ring constantly now, not marking the hours, but tolling for the dead. When they stop, the silence is worse than the sound. You make your way to the house of your first patient. It's a wealthy merchant's home. 3 stories of timber and plaster with glass windows and a heavy oak door. The door stands ajar. You knock and call out, but no one answers. You push it open and step inside. The smell hits you immediately. A thick, sweet-sour stench that makes your stomach clench. You've smelled death before, what physician hasn't? But never like this. This is deeper, heavier, a smell that seems to coat your throat and lungs. You press a cloth soaked in 4 thieves' vinegar to your nose and mouth, breathing through the sharp tang of vinegar and herbs. It helps, but not enough. You find the merchant on the 2nd floor, in what was once a fine bedroom. He lies on a bed draped with expensive linens now soaked with sweat and darker stains. His wife sits beside him, her face blank with shock or exhaustion. 2 of their children huddle in the corner. None of them speak as you approach. You examine the patient. The signs are unmistakable. His face is flushed with fever, his eyes glossy. His breath comes in short, labored gasps. And there, in his groin and under his arm, the telltale swellings, buboes, the infected lymph nodes that give the bubonic plague its name. They're the size of eggs, dark and hard. And when you touch one gently with your cane, you've learned quickly not to touch anything directly if you can help it. The man screams. You check his pulse. Rapid, thready, weak. You examine his urine, poured into your flask by his wife. It's dark, cloudy, all wrong. You ask about his symptoms. When did the fever start? Has he vomited? Has he coughed blood? The wife answers in a monotone, reciting the progression as if reading from a script she's memorized. 3 days ago, he was fine. Complained of feeling tired. Nothing more. 2 days ago, the fever began. Yesterday, the buboes appeared. Today, he barely recognizes his own family. You know what comes next? In a day, maybe 2, he'll be dead. The plague moves that fast. But you're a physician. You have to try. You open your satchel and begin. First, bloodletting. The theory is sound, according to everything you've learned. The body has too much corrupted blood, and removing it will restore balance. You make a cut in his arm with your fleam, letting the dark blood flow into a bowl. The man barely reacts. His wife looks away. Next, you apply a poultice to the buboes. Following the recipe you memorized, you crush figs and onions, mix them with yeast and butter. and spread the paste over the swellings. It's meant to draw out the pestilence, to soften the buboes so they'll burst and drain. Whether it actually helps or just causes more pain, you honestly don't know. You prescribe Theriac, that ancient cure-all, a spoonful mixed with wine, to be taken 3 times daily. You instruct the wife to keep the room well ventilated to dispel the miasma, but also to burn aromatic woods, juniper, rosemary, to purify the air. You tell her to prepare light foods, nothing too rich, to avoid overheating his humors. You tell her to pray. She asks the question you've been dreading. Will he live? You want to lie. You want to offer hope, but you're too tired, and you've already seen too many die, and the truth is written plainly on her husband's fever-flushed face. I don't know. You say, keep him comfortable. I'll return tomorrow. You won't return tomorrow. You know this already. You know, because tomorrow this house will be marked with a cross in ash or paint, marking it as plague-stricken, warning others to stay away. You know, because tomorrow the merchant will be dead, and his wife, and possibly one or both of those children, huddled in the corner. You leave the house. The sunlight feels too bright, too normal. You walk to the next house in your list, and the next, and the next. By the time darkness falls, you've seen 15 patients, 15 cases of bubonic plague in various stages. Some still have the strength to beg for help. Others can only stare at the ceiling, lost in delirium. You've bled them all. You've applied poultices and prescribed medicines. You've offered what comfort you can. You haven't saved a single one. You return to your own home as night settles over the city. You strip off your robes. You can smell the sickness on them now, clinging to the fabric. You wash your hands and face and arms with vinegar and water, scrubbing until your skin burns. You check yourself for signs of infection, fever, swellings, the dark spots that sometimes appear on the skin. Nothing yet. But it's early. The incubation period can be days. You lie down but don't sleep. Instead, you stare at the ceiling and think about what you've seen. About the speed of the disease, the inevitability of death. About how everything you learned at university, all those years of study, all that careful theory about humors and balance, means nothing in the face of this pestilence. And you think about tomorrow, when you'll have to get up and do it all again. Welcome to your new life as a medieval plague physician. You've been hired to fight death itself, armed with nothing but outdated medical theory, useless remedies, and a deep, growing certainty that you're going to lose. 2. The education. What you think you know. Before we go further into your daily horror, let's talk about what you actually learned during all those years of training. Because understanding what medieval physicians believed and why is crucial to understanding just how helpless you really are. You studied for 10 years to become a physician. 10 years of rigorous academic training at one of Europe's universities. This wasn't casual learning. University education was expensive, prestigious, and built on centuries of accumulated medical knowledge passed down from the ancient Greeks and Romans through the Arabic scholars who preserved and expanded that knowledge during Europe's Dark Ages, and finally translated back into Latin for European scholars. Your education began with the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. You learned to read and write Latin fluently, because all medical texts are in Latin. You learned to construct logical arguments, to debate, to defend your positions against challenges. Then came the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. You learned mathematics because dosages matter. You learned astronomy because the position of the stars and planets was believed to influence health and disease. You learned music because everything in the universe, including the human body, was thought to operate on principles of harmony and proportion. Only after mastering these liberal arts did you move on to medical studies proper. And here's where your education gets both impressive and tragically misguided. The foundation of everything you know about medicine comes from Galen of Pergamon, a Greek physician who lived in the 2nd century AD, over 1,000 years before you were born. Galen's writings, along with those of Hippocrates before him, form the absolute bedrock of medieval medical theory. You've memorized vast passages. You can recite the principles of the four humors in your sleep. According to Galenic theory, the human body contains four fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humor is associated with different qualities, elements, and temperaments. Blood is hot and moist, associated with air, and the sanguine temperament, phlegm, is cold and moist, associated with water and the phlegmatic temperament. Yellow bile is hot and dry, associated with fire and the choleric temperament. Black bile is cold and dry, associated with earth and the melancholic temperament. Health, according to this system, is simply a matter of keeping these four humors in proper balance. Disease occurs when one humor becomes excessive or deficient. The physician's job is to diagnose which humor is out of balance and then restore equilibrium through diet, medication, or direct intervention like bloodletting. This system is elegant, comprehensive, and completely wrong, but you don't know that. You also learn miasma theory, the idea that diseases are spread through bad air or poisonous vapors. These vapors, called miasmas, were believed to emanate from rotting organic matter. Swamps, sewage, corpses, anything that produced a foul smell. The worse something smelled, the more dangerous it was thought to be. This is why physicians like you carry aromatic substances. The sweet smells are supposed to protect you from the corrupting influence of miasmas. Again, this seems logical. Places with bad sanitation do tend to have more disease. The reasoning is sound even if the mechanism is entirely wrong. You don't know that diseases are caused by microscopic organisms. The very idea would seem absurd to you. How could something too small to see cause such devastating illness? Your diagnostic methods are based on this humoral framework. You've been trained in three primary techniques. First, uroscopy, examining a patient's urine. You learn to identify health and disease by studying the color, clarity, consistency, and even smell of urine. There are charts showing dozens of different urine shades, each supposedly indicating a different imbalance of humors or disease state. You carry your urine flask everywhere, holding it up to the light, swirling it gently, looking for sediments or cloudiness. It's actually the symbol of your profession. When people see a man carrying a urine flask, they know he's a physician. Second, pulse taking. You learn to feel a patient's pulse and interpret its strength, speed, and rhythm. A rapid pulse might indicate too much heat in the body. A weak pulse might suggest an excess of cold, moist phlegm. The pulse reveals the state of the humors and guides your treatment. Third, astrology. This isn't superstition to you, it's medical science. You learned that the movements of celestial bodies influence health and disease. The position of the moon affects the tides, doesn't it? And the human body is largely water, so logically the moon must affect it too. Different zodiac signs govern different parts of the body. You consult astronomical charts before prescribing treatments, before performing bloodletting, before making any major medical decision. Some days are simply bad days for surgery or medication. The stars say so. For treatments, you have an extensive pharmacopoeia. You know hundreds of herbal remedies, each carefully categorized by whether they heat or cool, moisten or dry. If a patient has too much cold, moist phlegm, you prescribe hot, dry herbs. If they have too much hot, dry yellow bile, you prescribe cold, moist remedies. It's all about restoring balance. You know how to compound theriac, that legendary cure-all that supposedly contains the power to heal any ailment. The recipe has been passed down since ancient times and includes over 50 ingredients. Opium for pain, viper flesh to fight poison, following the principle of light cures like cinnamon, myrrh, honey, and dozens of other exotic and expensive substances. Preparing theriac properly takes months. The ingredients must be mixed in precise proportions at specific times, then aged in sealed jars. A good theriac is worth more than gold. You've also learned surgery, though as a university-trained physician, you consider it somewhat beneath you. In the medieval medical hierarchy, physicians are scholars who diagnose and prescribe. Surgeons are craftsmen who cut and sew. Barber surgeons, who combine barbering with basic surgery, are even lower on the social ladder. Still, you know how to set bones, lance boils, and yes, perform bloodletting. Ah, bloodletting. This is perhaps the most important therapeutic technique in your arsenal. The logic, according to Galenic theory, is impeccable. If disease is caused by an excess of corrupted blood, then removing some of that blood should cure the disease. Simple, elegant, obvious. You learned exactly where to cut based on the ailment and the patient's astrological sign. Different locations on the body correspond to different organs and humors. You learn how much blood to remove, usually measured in ounces, though in severe cases you might drain a pint or more. You learn to use leeches for more localized bloodletting, applying them directly to inflamed areas so they could suck out the bad humors concentrated there. Every single bit of this training was rigorous, systematic, and based on centuries of accumulated medical wisdom. You genuinely are one of the most educated people in your society. Your knowledge of anatomy, mostly from Galen's animal dissections, but still, pharmacology, diagnostic techniques, and therapeutic interventions far exceeds that of the average person. You can read Latin. You can cite ancient authorities. You understand complex theoretical frameworks. And none of it, absolutely none of it, is going to help you fight the plague. Because here's what you don't know. You don't know that the plague is caused by bacteria, not humoral imbalances or miasma. You don't know that it's spread primarily by flea bites, not bad air. You don't know that bloodletting weakens patients who desperately need their strength. You don't know that your theriac, for all its exotic ingredients, is medically useless. You don't know that the position of Mars has no bearing whatsoever on whether your patient will survive. You don't know that examining urine tells you almost nothing about plague infection. In short, everything you think you know is wrong, or at least wrong enough that it won't save anyone. But you don't know that you don't know. From your perspective, you're applying sound medical science based on the greatest authorities of the past 1,000 years. When your treatments fail, and they fail constantly, you don't conclude that the theory is wrong. You conclude that you need to apply it better, more precisely, with the right adjustments for each patient's unique humoral balance and astrological chart. This, perhaps the cruelest part of being a medieval plague physician. You're not ignorant or lazy or uncaring. You're highly trained, deeply committed, and completely, utterly ineffective. You watch people die despite your best efforts. And the only thing you can think to do is try harder, bleed more carefully, consult your astrology charts more thoroughly, compound your theriac more precisely. The plague is going to teach you a devastating lesson. Sometimes being educated means knowing a lot of wrong things very confidently, and the learning is about to begin. 3. The daily rounds. Walking among the dying your first week as a plague physician establishes a routine that will become grimly familiar. You rise before dawn, when the streets are empty except for the night soil collectors and the occasional drunk stumbling home. You wash yourself with vinegar water, scrubbing every inch of exposed skin. You dress in your physician's robes, long, dark, practical. No special protective gear, because it doesn't exist yet. Just the same clothing you've always worn, perhaps with an extra layer if it's cold. You check yourself for symptoms. Every morning, the same ritual. Feel your neck, your armpits, your groin for any sign of swelling. Take your own pulse. Examine your tongue in the polished metal mirror. Check your skin for the dark spots or rashes that sometimes accompany plague. So far, nothing. But you know the incubation period can last several days. You could already be infected and not know it. You pack your satchel, phlegm, leeches, herbs, theriac, your urine flask, strips of linen, your notebook for recording symptoms and outcomes. You also pack a walking stick not for support, but as a tool. You've learned to use it to lift blankets, to point at things, to maintain distance. The less you touch directly, the better. It's not based on any medical theory you learned at university. It's just common sense born of watching too many physicians fall ill. The city council has provided you with a list of addresses. Mostly they're homes that have reported illness, but you also make rounds through certain neighborhoods that have been hit hardest. The poor quarters, naturally, where people live packed together in conditions that would horrify you if you weren't too exhausted to feel anything. Your first stop is often a wealthy household. The rich can afford to summon you promptly, and they expect personal attention. They also pay better, which matters because your university training left you with substantial debts. Though perhaps money matters less now, when tomorrow is never guaranteed. You knock. A servant answers, if the household still has servants who haven't fled. You're led inside, often to a bedchamber that smells of sickness despite the herbs burning in braziers. The patient lies in bed, attended by family members who look at you with desperate hope. They believe you can save their loved one. They believe in your education, your authority, your knowledge of the ancient texts. You want to live up to that belief. God, how you want to. You examine the patient. Let's say it's a woman this time, perhaps 40 years old, well-dressed, from a prosperous merchant family. The symptoms are always similar by now. High fever, extreme fatigue, the telltale buboes swelling in her neck and groin. Her skin has a grayish cast. Her eyes are glassy with fever. When you take her pulse, it's rapid and weak. You ask your questions. When did the fever begin? Has she had chills? Vomiting? Has she been near anyone else who fell ill? The answers help you gauge how far the disease has progressed, though the outcome is usually the same regardless. You perform uroscopy, examining her urine in your flask. It's dark, turbid, all wrong. According to your training, this indicates an excess of melancholic humors, black bile, cold and dry. But you've examined the urine of dozens of plague patients by now, and they all show similar abnormalities. The diagnostic precision you learned at university seems meaningless when every patient presents the same way. You decide on bloodletting. It's the primary intervention for most diseases, especially those involving fever and inflammation. You make a careful cut in her arm, letting the blood flow into a bowl. She barely reacts. The fever has dulled her senses. You remove perhaps 8 ounces, watching the dark blood pool. In your mind, you're thinking, this will reduce the heat and pressure, restore balance, give her body a chance to fight back. In reality, you're weakening a patient who desperately needs her strength. Next, you prepare a poultice for the buboes. You crush figs, cooked onions, and yeast into a paste, adding butter to make it spreadable. This recipe comes from old texts, passed down through generations of physicians. The theory is that the warm, moist poultice will draw out the pestilence, causing the buboes to soften and burst, releasing the corrupted humors trapped inside. You spread the poultice over the swellings. The woman moans at your touch. The buboes are hard, hot, angry. Some physicians recommend lancing them immediately, cutting them open to drain the pus. You've tried that. Sometimes it seems to help. More often, the patient simply dies with an open, draining wound instead of a closed, festering one. You prescribe theriac mixed with wine, to be taken 3 times daily. You instruct the family to keep windows closed. Night air is particularly dangerous, full of concentrated miasma, but to burn aromatic woods to purify the air. You tell them to feed her light broths, nothing heavy that might overtax her digestion. You remind them to pray. The husband asks the inevitable question, will she recover? You've stopped making promises. I cannot say. The pestilence is in God's hands. Continue the treatments. I'll return tomorrow. You know you're giving false hope. You know that tomorrow she'll likely be worse, not better. You know that within 3 days she'll probably be dead. But what else can you do? Take away even that thin reed of hope? You move on to the next house. And the next. By the end of the morning, you've seen 8 patients in wealthy households, all with plague, all dying or already dead. Your treatments vary slightly based on each patient's symptoms and humoral balance, but the pattern is always the same. Bloodletting, poultices, herbs, prayers. You haven't saved anyone. In the afternoon, you make your rounds through the poorer quarters. Here, the conditions are even worse. Families live 3 or 4 to a room in wooden tenements that lean precariously over narrow streets. The smell is overwhelming sewage, cooking fires, unwashed bodies, and underneath it all, the sweet rotten stench of plague. The streets are filthy with refuse. Pigs root in the gutters. Rats scurry openly in broad daylight, bold and well-fed. You've started to notice the rats. There are more of them than usual, many more, and they seem unafraid. You've begun to wonder if there's a connection. Some physicians have suggested that the plague might be related to animals, cats, dogs, rats, but it's only speculation. Besides, how would rats cause human illness? They don't breathe miasma into human lungs. The theory doesn't fit with what you learned at university. In one tenement, you find an entire family afflicted. Father, mother, 3 children. The father is already dead, lying on a pallet in the corner. No one has had the strength to move him. The mother is delirious with fever. The children, the youngest, perhaps 5 years old, has buboes under both arms. She's crying weakly, calling for her mother. The mother can't hear her. You do what you can. Bloodletting seems pointless here. They're already so weak. You apply poultices. You leave what herbs you can spare. You instruct the eldest child, maybe 10 years old, on how to care for his family. He stares at you with eyes that have seen too much. He doesn't cry. Children in the poor quarters learn early not to cry. You leave feeling hollow. In the wealthy houses, at least there are servants, clean linens, food, and medicine. Here, there's nothing. These people will die in filth, unwarned except by those who will soon follow them. By evening, you've seen perhaps 20 patients total. Your notebook is full of observations. Patient shows advanced pestilence, buboes in groin. Bloodletting performed, prognosis poor. Young male, 3rd day of fever, buboes lanced, some drainage, prescribed theriac. Return tomorrow. Female patient deceased in morning visit. Instructed family on burial procedures. That last note is becoming more common. You're starting to arrive at houses only to find your patients have died since your last visit. Sometimes they died hours ago, sometimes days. The family couldn't afford the burial fees, so the corpse just lies there, rotting, filling the house with that terrible smell. You're supposed to report these deaths to the city authorities. There are regulations about plague corpses. They're supposed to be buried quickly, in designated areas away from the city, but the system is overwhelmed. The grave pits fill faster than they can be dug. The church graveyards are overflowing. Bodies are being buried in gardens, in fields, anywhere there's space. You return home as darkness falls. The streets are emptier than they were even yesterday. More shops have closed. More houses stand dark and silent. The only sound is the constant tolling of bells. Death bells. So many that they've lost meaning. They're just noise now, the background soundtrack to your life. You strip off your robes, wash with vinegar water, check yourself for symptoms. Still nothing. You're either remarkably lucky, or you're already infected and the disease hasn't manifested yet. Or perhaps, and this thought keeps you awake at night, you've already had it. Some patients do survive. They get the fever, the buboes form, and then somehow, inexplicably, they recover. Could you have had a mild case? Is that why you're still healthy? You don't know. You can't know. You sit at your desk and write up your case notes. This isn't just for your own records. It's required by your contract. The city council wants detailed information about the plague. How many cases? What areas are most affected? What symptoms present? What treatments work? You do your best. Though, what treatments work is a question you still can't answer. Nothing works. Nothing reliably. Anyway, you write. 23 patients examined today. 8 new cases reported in the merchant quarter. 5 deaths confirmed. Bloodletting performed in 14 cases. Buboes lanced in 3. All patients prescribed Theriac and poultice treatments. No significant improvements observed. Request additional supplies of figs and leeches. You don't write. I feel like I'm accomplishing nothing. Every patient I see dies. My treatments seem to make no difference. I'm starting to doubt everything I was taught. I'm terrified that all my learning, all my years of study, all my careful application of Galenic principles is completely useless against this pestilence. You don't write that because admitting it, even to yourself, even in a private journal, would mean confronting a truth you're not ready to face. Instead, you close the notebook, blow out the candle, and lie down to sleep. Tomorrow, you'll get up and do it all again. 4. The treatments. Medieval medicine's greatest failures. Let's examine in detail the treatments you're using, because understanding what you actually do and why it doesn't work is crucial to grasping just how helpless you really are. Bloodletting is your primary intervention, and you perform it multiple times daily. The theory is Galenic. Excess or corrupted blood causes fever and inflammation, so removing blood should reduce both. You use several methods. Venesection with a fleam. You make a small cut in a vein, usually in the arm or sometimes the neck, and let blood flow into a bowl. For plague patients, you typically remove 8 to 12 ounces, though some physicians advocate for more aggressive bleeding. You choose your incision point carefully based on astrological charts. Never bleed during certain lunar phases. Never cut in an area governed by the patient's zodiac sign during that sign's ascending period. What's actually happening? You're removing blood from patients who are already fighting a severe infection. Their bodies are desperate for every drop of blood, every cell, every ounce of oxygen-carrying capacity. By bleeding them, you're actively making them weaker, reducing their chance of survival. You're removing the very resources their immune systems need to fight the infection. Leeching. For more localized bloodletting, you apply leeches directly to or near the buboes. The leeches attach and draw blood, supposedly removing the bad humors concentrated in that area. You've been trained to use only healthy-looking leeches, kept in clean water. After feeding, you remove them carefully and store them for later use. What's actually happening? The leeches do remove blood locally, but this doesn't affect the bacterial infection causing the buboes. At best, it's neutral. At worst, you're introducing additional opportunities for infection if your leeches aren't as clean as you think, or if the bite wounds become infected. Lancing the buboes is controversial among physicians. Some argue it should be done immediately to release the corrupted humors. Others say to wait until the buboes ripen naturally. You've tried both approaches. When you lance a bubo, you use a sharp blade to cut into the swelling, then squeeze out the pus and blood. It's extraordinarily painful for the patient. They often scream or faint. The buboes sometimes drain copiously, filling bowl after bowl with foul-smelling discharge. What's actually happening? The buboes are swollen lymph nodes filled with bacteria and dead white blood cells. Lancing them doesn't cure the infection. The bacteria are throughout the bloodstream, not just concentrated in the lymph nodes. You're causing additional trauma and pain, possibly spreading bacteria to other areas, and creating open wounds that could become secondarily infected. In some rare cases, draining might provide temporary relief from pressure, but it doesn't affect the disease's progression. Poultices and plasters are applied directly to the buboes. You've learned dozens of recipes, but they all follow similar principles. Use warming, drawing substances to pull out the pestilence. Common ingredients include figs and cooked onions, mashed together with yeast and butter, bread soaked in milk or wine, crushed garlic and mustard, various herbs like wormwood or rue. Sometimes you add exotic ingredients for wealthy patients. Powdered pearls, gold leaf, ground precious stones. These don't change the effectiveness, which is to say, they don't work either, but they make the patient feel they're receiving premium care. What's actually happening? These poultices do nothing to fight the bacterial infection. At best, they might provide slight comfort from the warmth or moisture. At worst, they're uncomfortable. trap heat and moisture in ways that make the patient more miserable and waste precious time and resources. Theriac is prescribed to nearly every patient. This legendary compound, supposedly invented by Mithridates Vi and perfected by Galen himself, contains more than 50 ingredients. The exact recipe varies, but common components include opium, the only genuinely useful ingredient, as it eases pain, powdered viper flesh, following the principle that poison fights poison, myrrh and frankincense, cinnamon, and other exotic spices, honey as a base, dozens of herbs, minerals, and animal products. Preparing Theriac properly takes months. The ingredients must be precisely measured, mixed in the correct order at specific times of day, then aged in sealed vessels. A well-made Theriac is expensive. A single dose costs more than a laborer makes in a week. But for the wealthy dying of plague, no expense is too great. What's actually happening? Most of Theriac's ingredients are medically inert against plague. The opium provides some pain relief, which is at least something. But you're giving patients an expensive, complex medication that does virtually nothing to fight bacterial infection. In some cases, the opium might actually depress respiration, making it harder for patients with pneumonic plague to breathe. Dietary prescriptions are taken very seriously. According to humoral theory, food affects the balance of humors in the body. For plague patients, you typically prescribe light broths and thin gruels, avoiding heavy foods that might overtax the digestive system. No raw fruits or vegetables, thought to be too cold and moist. Diluted wine to warm and strengthen the patient. Avoid fish, considered too cold and phlegmatic. Small amounts of easily digested meat like chicken. You spend considerable time instructing families on proper nutrition for plague patients. Some physicians write detailed dietary regimens, specifying not just what to eat, but when and how much. What's actually happening? Encouraging patients to eat light, easily digested foods isn't necessarily harmful. Chicken broth actually has some nutritional value, but your restrictions on fruits and vegetables mean patients aren't getting vitamins they need. And for patients too sick to eat, which describes most plague victims in later stages, these careful dietary instructions are meaningless. Air purification is considered crucial. Since disease spreads through miasma, purifying the air should prevent and treat plague. You instruct families to burn aromatic woods and herbs, juniper, rosemary, bay laurel. Hang bundles of dried flowers and herbs in the sick room. Keep windows closed at night. Night air is particularly poisonous. Sprinkle vinegar or rose water around the room. For wealthy patients, burn expensive incense like frankincense. You carry your own aromatic substances, a pomander filled with herbs, or a cloth soaked in four thieves vinegar that you hold to your nose in especially foul-smelling rooms. What's actually happening? The aromatic substances do nothing to prevent disease transmission. They just make the smell more bearable. Keeping windows closed is actually counterproductive. Better ventilation would be healthier. But your instincts are backwards because you think the disease is in the air itself rather than in bacteria spread by droplets or fleas. Astrological timing governs when you perform treatments. You consult astronomical charts to determine the optimal moments for bloodletting, administering medicines, or performing surgery. Some days are simply bad days for medical intervention when the stars are unfavorably aligned. You might delay treating a patient because Mercury is in retrograde or the moon is in the wrong phase. What's actually happening? The alignment of celestial bodies has no effect whatsoever on disease or treatment outcomes. By delaying necessary interventions for astrological reasons, you're potentially making things worse. Though to be fair, since your interventions don't work anyway, the delay probably doesn't matter much. Exotic remedies for desperate cases include crushed emerald powder mixed with wine for the very wealthy, powdered unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, also expensive and useless, live chickens or pigeons strapped to the buboes, meant to draw out the pestilence, the Vickery method, mercury or arsenic compounds. These actually kill patients faster than the plague. Drinking urine or bathing in urine, based on a misunderstanding of ancient texts. Sitting in a room with dead animals to transfer the prismeister. Disease. These treatments are not standard practice. Most physicians recognize them as desperate measures or outright quackery. But when nothing else works, when patients and families are begging for any hope, some physicians resort to increasingly bizarre interventions. What's actually happening? These range from neutral, crushed emeralds do nothing but cost a fortune, to actively harmful. Mercury and arsenic are toxic. The live chicken method is particularly grim. You strap a live bird to a festering bubo and wait for it to supposedly absorb the disease. The chicken dies, probably from being strapped to a rotting lymph node, and the patient remains sick. It's medieval medicine at its most desperately futile. Quarantine is one of the few interventions that actually helps, though you don't fully understand why. Some cities have begun isolating plague victims, sealing houses where plague has appeared, and requiring the sick to be separated from the healthy. You see, the results areas that practice strict quarantine have fewer cases. But quarantine conflicts with your understanding of disease transmission. If plague spreads through miasma in the air, then it should affect everyone in an area equally, regardless of who's been in contact with whom. The fact that quarantine works suggests something you're not quite grasping, that the disease requires direct or indirect contact, not just proximity to bad air. Some physicians are beginning to question miasma theory based on observations like this. But questioning Galen, questioning the ancient authorities you spent years studying, is not done lightly. These are foundations of medicine. If they're wrong about disease transmission, what else might they be wrong about? It's easier to rationalize the evidence than to rebuild your entire understanding of medicine. What's actually happening? Quarantine works because it limits contact with infected people and, indirectly, with the fleas carrying bacteria. It's one of the only effective measures available to you, and it works despite your theoretical understanding, not because of it. Here's the devastating truth. You have exactly one intervention that sometimes helps quarantine, and you don't even understand why it works. Everything else you do ranges from useless to actively harmful. Your bloodletting weakens patients. Your medicines provide only minimal symptomatic relief. Your dietary restrictions eliminate useful nutrients. Your exotic remedies are either worthless or toxic. And yet you continue day after day, applying these treatments with careful precision. Because what else can you do? Admit that 10 years of education were based on false premises? Admit that you're helpless? Admit that you're watching people die and you have no idea how to save them? No. You adjust dosages. You try different combinations of herbs. You consult your astrology charts more carefully. You compound your theriac more precisely. You search ancient texts for remedies you might have overlooked. Because the alternative accepting that you cannot help, that your medicine is useless, that all your learning means nothing is unthinkable. Tomorrow, you'll bleed another dozen patients. You'll apply more poultices. You'll prescribe more theriac. And they'll die anyway, but at least you'll have tried. Continued 5. To colleagues, fleeing, dying, and debating, you are not alone in this crisis, though some days it feels that way. There are other physicians in the city, though their numbers dwindle with each passing week. Some fled before the plague arrived, hearing rumors and taking the ancient advice. Cheeto, lunge, tard. Others stayed initially, but left once the death toll became clear. You don't judge them harshly. The urge to flee is powerful, primal. You feel it yourself every morning. The physicians who remain fall into several categories. First, there are the university-trained doctors like you, self-educated, licensed, expensive. You recognize each other by your bearing, your Latin, your urine flasks. In better times, you might have been competitors, each guarding your wealthy patients and your reputation. Now, you're something like comrades, united by the shared experience of fighting an unwinnable war. You cross paths at the apothecary, at patients' homes, Occasionally, at the city council meetings where you're required to report, you exchange observations. I've seen 30 cases this week. None survived beyond the 5th day. I tried lancing the buboes early. It made no difference. The astrology charts indicate we should avoid bloodletting during the new moon, but waiting seems to make things worse. My supply of theriac is running low. The apothecary says he can't get more viper flesh. These conversations are brief, professional, carefully devoid of emotion. No one admits fear. No one discusses the possibility that your treatments don't work. Instead, you discuss techniques, dosages, timing, as if precision were the issue, as if you just haven't found the right combination yet. But sometimes, late at night, a colleague will confide something darker. One physician, trained at Montpellier, admits that he's seen no difference in outcomes, whether he treats patients or not. Another says his dreams are haunted by the faces of patients he couldn't save. A third, weeping quietly over wine, confesses that he's contemplating leaving despite his contract, despite his oath, despite everything. The next week, that third colleague is gone. Whether he fled or fell ill, you never learn. Then there are the surgeon physicians, the practitioners who combine university education with practical surgical skills. Men like Guy de Chauliac, who serves Pope Clement VI in Avignon, and who stays despite the danger, treating patients and documenting everything he sees. You've read some of his observations, passed through the medical network. He distinguishes between the bubonic form, with the characteristic buboes, and the pneumonic form, with bloody coughing and rapid death. He admits openly that physicians felt useless and ashamed because they could do so little. That admission, rare in medical writing of your time, resonates deeply. Yes, useless and ashamed. That captures it perfectly. Below the university-trained physicians in the medical hierarchy are the barber surgeons. They combine barbering with basic medical procedures, bloodletting, tooth pulling, minor surgery. They have less education, but more practical experience with blood and cutting. Some have been pressed into plague service by the city authorities. They bleed patients, lance buboes, prepare bodies for burial. Most aren't trained in medical theory and don't pretend to understand the complexities of humoral balance. They just do the work and collect their pay. Many of the barber surgeons die. They have more direct contact with patients than you do, and they can't afford to be as careful. Or perhaps their treatments are no more or less effective than yours, and the difference in survival is just random chance. You honestly don't know anymore. Then, there are the apothecaries, who compound medicines and sell ingredients. They're overwhelmed with demand for plague remedies. Theriac, four thieves vinegar, aromatic herbs, anything that might help. Their shops are crowded with desperate customers willing to pay any price. Some apothecaries are honest, selling quality ingredients at inflated but justifiable prices. Others are charlatans selling fake theriac without the expensive viper flesh. Watered-down medicines or outright frauds. You've had arguments with several apothecaries about quality. One sold you powdered emerald that was clearly just ground glass. Another's theriac smelled wrong, probably made with inferior ingredients. But what can you do? Report them to the authorities. The authorities are overwhelmed, just trying to bury the dead. There are also the unlicensed practitioners, herbalists, wise women, cunning folk. They've always existed on the margins of medicine, treating those who can't afford proper physicians. During the plague, their business has boomed. They sell charms, potions, prayers. Some of their remedies are based on genuine herbal knowledge passed down through generations. Others are pure superstition. You're supposed to oppose them. They're practicing medicine without training or license. But honestly, their remedies work about as well as yours, which is to say, not at all. If people want to spend their last coins on a charm or a prayer, who are you to stop them? The monks and priests play their own medical role. Many monasteries have infirmaries and herb gardens. Some monks have considerable medical knowledge, particularly about herbalism. During the plague, monasteries often become impromptu hospitals, taking in the sick when nowhere else will. The monks pay dearly for this. Charity death rates among clergy are extraordinarily high. Entire monasteries are wiped out. The friars, who move among the common people hearing confessions and administering last rites, die in droves. They have constant contact with the sick and dying. Many show remarkable courage, staying with patients until the end, providing comfort even when cure is impossible. You respect them for that, even as you watch them fall one by one. And then there are the plague doctors hired by other cities, the ones who will, centuries later, wear the famous beaked masks. But that's not your time. In 1348, there's no distinctive plague doctor costume. The concept barely exists. You're just physicians, wearing your normal robes, doing your usual work under extraordinary circumstances. Some cities have tried hiring physicians specifically to treat plague patients, offering premium wages to attract talent. Most of these hired doctors are young, recently graduated, or struggling practitioners who couldn't establish a successful practice. The wealthy, experienced physicians have largely fled. The ones who stay are either committed, desperate, or trapped. Which category do you fall into? You're not sure anymore. Medical debates continue even during the crisis. Different schools of thought argue about the best approach. Some physicians advocate aggressive bloodletting, remove as much corrupted blood as possible. Others counsel moderation. Too much bloodletting weakens the patient. Some say lance the buboes immediately. Others say wait for them to ripen naturally. Some prescribe cooling remedies to counteract the fever. Others prescribe warming remedies to drive out cold, pestilential humors. These debates can become heated. You've witnessed arguments at the apothecary, at city council meetings, even at patients' bedsides. Everyone is certain they know the right approach. Everyone is equally ineffective. The scholarly physicians write treatises on the plague, hundreds of them actually analyzing the causes and proposing cures. The medical schools at Paris, Montpellier, Bologna all publish their recommendations. These documents cite Galen, Hippocrates, Avicenna. They discuss astrological influences. Many blame a recent conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. They propose elaborate treatment regimens. None of it helps. You've read some of these treatises. They're learned, carefully argued, full of citations and logical proofs. They would be impressive if they weren't so utterly useless. The authors confidently prescribe treatments that don't work, explain causes that are wrong, and predict outcomes that don't match reality. But what else can they do? They're working with the knowledge available to them, applying the best medical science of the 14th century. The problem is that 14th century medical science isn't good enough. Not even close. Colleagues die regularly. One week, you're discussing cases with a physician. The next week, you hear he's fallen ill. The week after that, he's dead. Or he's simply gone, fled, or succumbed. You never learn which. The medical community thins like wheat before a scythe. Each loss hits you. These are men you trained with, argued with, learned from. Men who understood the weight of this work. Their absence makes the burden heavier. Some physicians do survive falling ill with plague. Guy de Chauliac gets infected and recovers. He writes about it later. I developed a continuous fever with an opostum in the groin, and I was sick for almost 6 weeks. And I was in such danger that my friends believed I was about to die. But by softening and treating the sore, as I have said, I escaped death by the command of God. Did his treatments help? Or was he simply one of the lucky ones who had a strong enough constitution to survive? He attributes it to God's will, which is probably the only honest answer. You wonder sometimes if you've already had plague. A few days when you felt unwell, a brief fever, a tender spot in your armpit, but nothing developed into full-blown illness. Could you have had a mild case? Does that protect you now? Or are you just lucky so far? The medical community, such as it remains, develops its own rituals and superstitions. Some physicians refuse to treat patients on certain days. Some won't enter a house where they've previously lost a patient. Some carry elaborate collections of protective charms. You all wash with vinegar more frequently than is probably useful. You all check yourselves for symptoms multiple times daily. And you all, every last one of you, live with the knowledge that tomorrow could be your last day of health. That the next patient you see might be the one who finally infects you. That all your precautions, all your learning, might not be enough. It's a strange kind of camaraderie, built on shared exhaustion, shared failure, and shared mortality. You don't exactly become friends. There's no time for friendship, no energy for social niceties. But you recognize each other. You nod when you pass in the street. You share information without being asked. You attend each other's hastily organized funerals when time permits. You're all fighting the same losing battle, and that creates a bond stronger than any guild or university affiliation. 6. The patients. Rich, poor, and equally doomed. One of the cruelest aspects of plague is its democratic nature. Rich and poor alike fall to the pestilence. Your wealthy patients, with their fine homes and expensive medicines, die at about the same rate as the poor in their crowded tenements. Plague doesn't care about social class, but the experience of dying, the quality of care, the dignity afforded, those differ immensely. Your wealthy patients die in comfortable beds with clean linens. They're attended by family members or hired nurses. They receive your best efforts, the most expensive theriac, the finest herbs, the most careful bloodletting. You spend more time with them, discussing their symptoms, adjusting treatments, providing comfort. They have private rooms where aromatic woods burn constantly. Their families can afford to follow your dietary prescriptions. Chicken broth, diluted wine, soft bread. When they die, they're buried properly in church graveyards with prayers and ceremony. Your poor patients die on straw pallets in rooms shared with 6 other family members. They receive the same treatments, but rushed. You have so many patients and so little time. They get cheaper versions of medicines when they can afford any at all. Their families often can't follow your instructions because they lack the resources. Aromatic woods? They're lucky to have firewood for heat. Chicken broth? They haven't eaten chicken in months. When they die, they're buried in mass graves, often without priests, sometimes without even a marker. The outcomes are identical death, but the journey is vastly different. In wealthy homes, you're treated with respect. Servants bow and address you as master physician. You're offered wine, a place to wash your hands. The family listens intently to your instructions and asks intelligent questions. They trust your expertise. When their loved one dies despite your care, they thank you for your efforts and pay your fee without complaint. In poor homes, you're sometimes treated with suspicion or hostility. Who is this educated man in his fine robes, speaking Latin, prescribing expensive medicines we can't afford? When you leave instructions about boiling water or changing linens, families nod, but you know they won't comply, they lack the means. When their loved one dies, they sometimes blame you. Once, a grieving father actually threw a stone at you as you left. You don't report it. What good would it do? The poor also suffer more from the conditions that accelerate plague spread. They live packed together in poorly ventilated buildings. They share beds, spaces, air. Sanitation is terrible human waste in the streets. Water sources contaminated. Rats everywhere. When one person in a tenement gets plague, the whole building often follows. Wealthy families can isolate their sick in separate wings of the house. They can afford to have healthy family members leave entirely, retreating to country estates until the danger passes. The poor have nowhere to go. You try to treat all patients equally. You really do. Your oath, your training, your conscience demand it. But the reality is that you spend more time with the wealthy because they can afford to keep you longer, call you back for follow-up visits, request consultations. The poor get rushed appointments because you're trying to see as many people as possible with limited time. Some of your wealthy patients offer you extra payment to focus exclusively on their family, essentially bribes to prioritize them over others. You refuse these offers, but the temptation is real. Your own family needs money. Your university debts haven't disappeared. And these wealthy families are offering sums that could support you for months. But accepting would mean abandoning the poor entirely, and you can't quite bring yourself to do that. Children are the hardest patients. Rich or poor, children are hardest. They don't understand what's happening. They're frightened by your presence, by the pain of your treatments, by their parents' terror. They cry and ask when they'll feel better. You have no good answer. You've watched children die in agony, covered in buboes, their small bodies racked with fever. You've watched parents cradle dead children, unable to accept the loss. You've watched siblings cluster around a dying brother or sister, not understanding why they can't play together anymore. The poor children are often malnourished, even before plague strikes, which probably makes them more susceptible. They have runny noses, persistent coughs, skin conditions. When plague adds to these existing burdens, they have very little resistance. They die quickly, sometimes within 48 hours of the first symptoms. Wealthy children at least die with full bellies and in relative comfort. That's something, though it doesn't feel like much when you're watching a child suffer. Pregnant women present their own horrors. Plague doesn't spare pregnancy. You've treated women who develop plague while carrying children. Sometimes the mother dies and the unborn child with her. Sometimes the mother survives but miscarries. Sometimes, most cruelly, the baby is born healthy while the mother dies, leaving a newborn orphaned in a plague-struck city. You're not an expert in childbirth. That's usually handled by midwives. But during the plague, boundaries between medical specialties blur. You've delivered babies when midwives weren't available. You've tried to save mothers and children both. You've failed more often than succeeded. Elderly patients seem to have slightly better survival rates, possibly because some survived previous plague outbreaks and have some immunity. But better is relative. They still die in appalling numbers. And their deaths lack the tragic poetry of cut-short youth. They're just old people dying slightly later than expected, mourned by families too exhausted to mourn properly. You develop favorites among your patients, though you try not to. The young merchant who jokes even while dying, trying to keep his family's spirits up. The elderly woman who thanks you profusely for every visit, treating you like a beloved grandchild. The little girl who draws pictures for you with charcoal on scraps of parchment. These people matter to you. When they die, something inside you hardens a little more. You also develop patients you dread seeing. The ones who argue with every instruction, who blame you for their illness, who refuse treatments then complain when they don't improve. The ones whose homes reek so badly you can barely force yourself through the door. The ones who've been cruel to family members or servants, whose deaths you privately think might be deserved. You treat them anyway, but you don't linger. Some patients surprise you. The wealthy merchant you expected to die calmly instead rages against death, cursing God and everyone around him. The poor laborer you thought would go quietly instead faces death with remarkable dignity, comforting his children and making peace with his wife. Plague reveals character in ways normal life never does. A few patients survive. Not many, but a few. Their buboes burst and drain. The fever breaks, and slowly, incredibly, they recover. You wish you understood why. What makes these patients different? They don't seem to share any common characteristics. Young and old, rich and poor, well-nourished and starving, all survive in equal, tiny numbers. When a patient recovers, families treat it as a miracle. They thank God, they thank you. They light candles in churches. You're hailed as a miracle worker, proof that your treatments work. You don't correct them. Let them have their hope. Let them believe medicine made a difference. But you know the truth. Those patients survived despite your treatments, not because of them. They recovered through some combination of strong constitution, luck, and grace. Your bloodletting, your poultices, your theriac, none of it mattered. The patients who survive often describe similar experiences. Terrible fever, unbearable pain from the buboes, delirium. Then a crisis point where they felt like they were dying, the fever peaked and suddenly started to break. The buboes softened, began to drain. Over days or weeks, they slowly regain strength. These survivors are treated strangely by their communities. Some people believe they're blessed, protected by God. Others think they're cursed, carriers of plague who will spread it to others. Some survivors are welcomed back. Others are shunned. You've seen recovered patients unable to find work, unable to marry, ostracized for the crime of surviving. You wish you could study these survivors more carefully. What made them different? If you could understand that, maybe you could develop better treatments. But you don't have time for careful study. You're too busy trying to keep the living alive. As weeks turn to months, you become numb to individual suffering. It's a defense mechanism, you realize. If you felt every death fully, you'd be paralyzed with grief. So you build walls around your emotions. Patients become cases, people become symptoms, death becomes an expected outcome you note in your ledger without comment. Sometimes, the walls crack. A particular death hits you harder than others. Maybe the patient reminded you of someone you loved, or died in an especially cruel way, or was just too young. You break down briefly, weeping in an alley or in the privacy of your home. Then you rebuild the walls and continue. This emotional numbing frightens you. Are you becoming less human? Less compassionate? Will you ever be able to feel normally again? Or has plague permanently damaged something essential in your soul? You don't know. You're too tired to think about it. You have more patients to see tomorrow. 7. The scapegoats. When medicine fails, blame follows. When people can't understand a catastrophe, they look for someone to blame. And in medieval Europe during the Black Death, blame falls on the most vulnerable. Jews become the primary targets. Rumors spread that they've poisoned wells, causing the plague. The logic is twisted. Jewish communities sometimes have lower plague rates, probably due to different sanitation practices and dietary laws, which is taken as proof that they must have caused it. Why else would they be spared? You know, this is nonsense. You've treated Jewish patients. They die of plague just like everyone else, perhaps in slightly smaller numbers, but they're hardly immune. The well poisoning accusations make no sense medically. You understand miasma theory. And poisoned wells wouldn't create the symptoms you're seeing. Medical logic doesn't matter when people are terrified and looking for answers. Massacres begin. In Strasbourg, hundreds of Jews are burned alive. In other cities, they're expelled, beaten, killed. Their homes are looted. Their businesses destroyed. Entire Jewish communities are wiped out by Christian neighbors looking for someone to punish. Some clergy speak out against this violence, pointing out that Jews are dying too. The plague affects all of Christendom, that this hatred is unchristian. Pope Clement VI issues a papal bull explicitly stating that Jews are not responsible for the plague. He notes, quite reasonably, the plague is killing Jews in regions where no Jews live, and that Christians are dying in the same numbers. It doesn't help. The violence continues. You witness some of this firsthand. You see Jewish homes marked with red paint. You hear the accusations shouted in the streets. Once, you try to intervene when a mob is dragging a Jewish physician toward the city square. You argue that he's a medical colleague, that he's been treating Christian patients, that he's done nothing wrong. They nearly turn on you too. Someone shouts that you're a Jew lover, probably poisoning people yourself. You back away, frightened and ashamed. The Jewish physician disappears. You never learn what happened to him, though you can guess. Beggars and lepers also become targets. They're accused of spreading plague deliberately, rubbing infected pus on doorways or dropping poisoned rags in streets. Again, the accusations are baseless, but fear doesn't require evidence. Some towns expel all beggars and anyone with visible skin diseases. These unfortunates are driven into the countryside to survive as best they can, though most probably don't survive at all. Foreigners are suspect. Travelers are turned away from cities. Merchant caravans are attacked. Anyone who speaks a different language or dresses differently might be accused of being a plague carrier. The cosmopolitan world of medieval trade contracts into local suspicion and xenophobia. The medical profession itself comes under scrutiny. When your treatments fail, patients' families sometimes turn hostile. You're accused of incompetence, of making things worse, of secretly spreading plague to ensure continued employment. Some physicians are physically attacked. One colleague tells you about being pelted with stones by a grieving family who blamed him for their father's death. Another was accused of witchcraft. His medical knowledge was taken as evidence of occult powers, and his failure to cure plague as proof he was working for Satan. You become more cautious about how you present yourself. You emphasize your Christian faith, quoting scripture when appropriate, crossing yourself frequently. You distance yourself from any practices that might seem suspicious or occult. You avoid Arabic medical terms that might make ignorant people think you're practicing heathen medicine. Flagellants appear groups of religious fanatics who whip themselves publicly, believing their suffering will appease God's wrath and end the plague. They travel from town to town in processions, hundreds of people scourging themselves until blood flows, chanting prayers and hymns. Initially, they're welcomed as holy men, but their movement becomes more extreme. They claim their penance is more effective than the church's rituals. They attack clergy. They incite violence against Jews and other outsiders. Eventually, Pope Clement VI condemns them, but by then they've spread across Europe. You find the flagellants disturbing. Their theology is questionable. Suffering doesn't cure disease, and their persecution of Jews is directly contrary to Christian charity. But you also understand the impulse. When nothing else works, when prayer and medicine both fail, what's left but dramatic gestures of desperation? Women practicing traditional medicine, herbalists, midwives, wise women, face increased suspicion. Their knowledge of healing herbs and folk remedies has always made some people uncomfortable, existing as it does outside official church and university control. During the plague, suspicion turns to accusation. Some are accused of witchcraft, of causing plague through curses or evil magic. You know these women. Many have genuine medical knowledge passed down through generations. Their remedies are no less effective than yours, which is to say, they don't work against plague, but they help with many other ailments. You don't defend them publicly. It would do no good and might bring suspicion on you, but you feel their persecution as another failure. Another way plague is breaking down the bonds of community. Physicians from other cities or countries face xenophobia. If a foreign doctor arrives offering his services, he might be welcomed for his expertise or attacked as a plague bearer. It depends on the city, the day, the crowd's mood. You're grateful you're a native of this city. At least no one can accuse you of bringing plague from elsewhere. Small comfort, but you'll take what you can get. Some of the blame is more diffuse, aimed at sin in general, rather than specific groups. Preachers thunder that plague is God's punishment for humanity's wickedness. They list sins: pride, avarice, lust, gluttony. The solution, they say, is repentance, prayer, and moral reformation. This theology is at least less violent than scapegoating Jews, but it's not helpful medically. Pious people die of plague just as readily as sinners. You've treated priests and nuns and monks, all people of deep faith, and they died in the same numbers as everyone else. If plague were truly God's punishment for sin, wouldn't the wicked die while the righteous were spared? The random nature of death suggests otherwise. But pointing this out would be heresy, so you keep quiet. You yourself are sometimes blamed, though more subtly. Families who lose loved ones despite your treatment sometimes stop paying your fees. They spread word that you're incompetent. Your reputation, built over years of practice, erodes under the weight of constant failure. You want to defend yourself, to explain that no physician is having better results, that plague is simply beyond current medical knowledge. But such admissions would be professional suicide. So you say nothing and endure the whispered criticisms. The worst part is knowing that some of the blame is justified. Not the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories or the witchcraft accusations, but the simple fact that your treatments don't work. People are right to question medical competence when medicine is failing so completely. You can't admit this publicly, but privately, in the dark hours before dawn, you acknowledge it. Medicine is failing. You are failing. And people are suffering not just from plague, but from the desperate need to blame someone for it. The scapegoating and violence add their own death toll to plague's numbers. Jews killed in pogroms, beggars left to die, accused witches burned. These deaths are as much a part of the Black Death's legacy as bacterial infection. And you, a physician sworn to healing, watch helplessly as fear and ignorance kill almost as efficiently as disease. 8. The rats and the fleas. What you cannot see, you've started noticing the rats. How could you not? They're everywhere now, far more visible than before plague came. They scurry through streets in broad daylight. They nest in piles of refuse. They gnaw on corpses in the plague pits. Some are sluggish, sick-looking. You've seen dead rats in alleys, their bodies stiff and fly-covered. A few physicians have suggested rats might be connected to plague. The timing seems suspicious. Rat populations exploded just before human cases increased, and areas with the most rats seem to have the most plague cases. But the connection doesn't make sense according to your medical theories. Rats don't produce miasma. They don't breathe disease into human lungs. They're just vermin, unpleasant, but not particularly dangerous. The correlation seems coincidental. What you can't see, because you lack microscopes and knowledge of microbiology, is the real story. The rats are dying from plague, too. Yersinia pestis infects them first, spread by fleas that bite infected rodents and transmit bacteria to healthy ones. When rat populations are large and densely packed, plague spreads rapidly among them. The fleas are the actual vectors. Rat fleas, Xenopsoachiopus, feed on infected rats, picking up bacteria in their digestive systems. When the rat dies, the fleas leave the cooling body to find a new host. If rat populations are declining because plague is killing them, fleas turn to the next available warm-blooded creature, humans. When an infected flea bites a human, it regurgitates bacteria into the wound. The bacteria travel through the lymphatic system to the nearest lymph nodes, causing them to swell into buboes. If untreated, and you have no effective treatment, bacteria spread through the bloodstream, causing septicemia and death. This mechanism is completely invisible to you. You don't know bacteria exist. You don't know about disease vectors or insect-borne transmission. The idea that a tiny flea could cause such massive death would seem absurd. Sometimes you wonder about fleas, though. Everyone has them, rich and poor alike. Though the poor have more, fleas are just a fact of life, like rats or bad weather. You've never considered them dangerous, just annoying. But you've noticed the people who work with cloth and fur seem to get plague more frequently. Merchants who handle imported fabrics, tailors, furriers. Could there be a connection? Fleas do infest fabric and fur. But again, the theory doesn't fit. How would fleas cause humoral imbalance? You file the observation away. One more puzzle piece that doesn't fit anywhere. The poorest neighborhoods have the most rats and, consequently, the most plague. Their living conditions are perfect for rodents. Organic waste in streets, grain stored in easily accessible containers, buildings with gaps and holes. In wealthy neighborhoods, better sanitation and construction means fewer rats. This correlation between poverty, rats, and plague is obvious. But your interpretation is backwards. You think plague causes rats to proliferate, attracted to the smell of death, when actually rats enable plague to spread. Some cities have begun extermination programs, paying bounties for dead rats. You approve of this public health measure, though for the wrong reasons. You think removing rat corpses will reduce miasma. Actually, it's reducing the flea population's habitat. Cats become more valuable. They kill rats, after all. But this creates its own problem. Cats also have fleas, and those fleas can jump to humans just as easily as rat fleas. In some ways, increasing cat populations accelerates transmission. You've never paid much attention to animals and disease. Your medical training focused on humans. Veterinary medicine exists, but it's separate, considered less prestigious. The idea that studying rat diseases might help understand human diseases wouldn't occur to you. Dogs are blamed by some people. They're often covered in fleas, and they roam streets freely, potentially spreading disease. Some cities order mass culling of dogs. Thousands are killed. This achieves nothing. Dog fleas prefer dogs. They're not the primary plague vector, but the cullings give authorities something to do, some action to take in the face of catastrophe. You notice the plague seems to spread along trade routes. It arrived in European ports first. Venice, Genoa, Marseille, then spread inland following roads and rivers. Cities with robust trade connections get plague earlier and harder than isolated rural areas. This pattern suggests contagion, disease spreading from person to person or place to place. But contagion theory conflicts with miasma theory. If disease is caused by bad air, it shouldn't matter who you've been in contact with, only what air you're breathing. Some physicians are beginning to advocate for contagion theory. They point out that quarantine works, that isolating the sick reduces spread, that plague follows human movement patterns. They're essentially correct, though they still don't understand the mechanism. But contagion theory is controversial. It contradicts Galen and other ancient authorities. It suggests disease can be transmitted directly between people, which seems absurd to many scholars. After all, if contagion were real, wouldn't physicians be dying at much higher rates than the general population? Actually, physicians do die at higher rates, but this fact hasn't been systematically documented. You're agnostic on the question. Both theories seem partially right and partially wrong. Plague does seem to spread through contact, but it also seems to concentrate in areas with bad air and poor sanitation. Maybe both factors matter? You're closer to the truth than you realize, but you lack the conceptual framework to put it all together. What you also can't see is the mnemonic form of plague when bacteria infect the lungs directly. This form spreads person to person through respiratory droplets when infected people cough. It's even deadlier than bubonic plague, killing within 48 hours usually. Pneumonic plague doesn't cause buboes, which confuses you. These patients just develop high fever and begin coughing blood. They die so quickly you barely have time to attempt treatment. You classify it as a different disease, perhaps a complication of the main pestilence. Some physicians distinguish between different forms of plague, noting that some patients get buboes while others cough blood, and some unfortunate souls get both. Guy de Chauliac writes extensively about these variations, but without understanding the underlying bacterium, it's impossible to know these are different manifestations of the same infection. The seasonality of plague provides more clues you can't quite interpret. Bubonic plague is worse in warm months when fleas are most active. Pneumonic plague can spread year-round, but is often worse in winter when people huddle indoors in close contact. You notice these patterns, but attribute them to astrological influences or seasonal changes in miasma. In a few centuries, scientists will understand all of this. They'll identify Yersinia pestis, study flea vectors, develop antibiotics that can cure plague in days. But that knowledge comes too late for you and your patients. For now, you continue treating plague with bloodletting and poultices, while the real culprit's bacteria invisible to your eyes. Carried by fleas you consider mere nuisances, amplified by rats you view as coincidental, continue their work undisturbed. Sometimes, late at night, you wonder if there's something fundamental you're missing, some piece of the puzzle that would make everything make sense. The way plague spreads, the randomness of who lives and dies, the failure of all your treatments, it all suggests something wrong with your understanding. But what could it be? The theory of humors is supported by centuries of medical practice. Galen dissected animals and described what he found. The ancient authorities were brilliant men who thought carefully about disease. How could they all be wrong? You push the doubts away. Tomorrow you have patients to see, treatments to perform, notes to record. Understanding can wait. Right now, you just need to survive. And somewhere in the shadows, unseen and unstoppable, The rats continue to die, the fleas continue to jump, and the bacteria continue to multiply. 9. The dying city. Social collapse plague doesn't just kill people. It kills the social fabric that holds communities together. You watch your city unravel day by day, structure giving way to chaos, order decaying into barely controlled panic. The first casualty is trust. People avoid each other, afraid of contagion. The marketplace, once bustling with vendors and customers haggling cheerfully, becomes a sparse gathering where people keep their distance. Transactions are hurried. Money is left in vinegar to purify it. No one shakes hands or embraces. Families fracture under the strain. You've seen households where healthy members flee, abandoning sick relatives to die alone. Parents leave children. Children leave parents. Spouses separate. The bonds of family love, supposedly the strongest bonds humans have, snap under plague's pressure. You understand, even as it horrifies you. The instinct for self-preservation is powerful. When staying means almost certain death, leaving looks like wisdom rather than cowardice. Some families stay together, nursing their sick until everyone falls ill. These households often die completely, entire families wiped out, discovered weeks later by neighbors who finally notice the smell. The servant classes evaporate. Wealthy homes that once employed dozens of staff suddenly can't find anyone willing to work. Who wants to clean plague-infected linens or empty the chamber pots of the dying? Even high wages and promises of protection can't convince people to take these jobs. Those servants who remain demand extraordinary pay. A maid who once earned a few pennies weekly now demands silver. The balance of power has shifted with so many dead. Labor is scarce, and workers know their value. Some masters respond by treating surviving servants better. Others resort to threats or force. You've heard of servants being locked into houses with sick families, essentially imprisoned until they either nurse their employers back to health or die themselves. The economic system buckles. Shops close as merchants die or flee. Guilds can't maintain membership standards when half their members are dead. Crafts requiring years of apprenticeship lose their skilled workers, and there's no time to train replacements. Food prices swing wildly. Sometimes food is cheap because vendors are desperate to sell before they die or flee. Sometimes it's ruinously expensive because supply chains have collapsed and farmers won't bring produce into plague-ridden cities. You've seen riots over bread. Hungry people attacking bakeries, overwhelming guards, stealing food. The authorities respond with brutal force, which only drives the violence underground. Crime increases. With so much death, property stands empty and unguarded. Thieves break into plague houses, stealing from the dead or dying. Some looters wear crude protective gear, leather masks, gloves, showing they understand something about contagion, even if the theory is unclear. The city watch is overwhelmed. Many guards have died or deserted. Those who remain can't maintain order. Curfews are declared but not enforced. Laws against looting are written but not prosecuted. The whole apparatus of law and order grinds to a halt. Prostitution persists remarkably. Even during plague, some people seek physical comfort, human contact, the illusion of normalcy. The prostitutes you occasionally see in the streets look thin and haunted, but they're still working. Some claim they have charms or prayers that protect them. Some are simply desperate enough not to care. Churches remain open, though services are sparsely attended. People are afraid to gather in crowds. And frankly, religious faith is tested when prayer seems as ineffective as medicine. You've overheard bitter jokes. Pray to God, but also flee the plague god, helps those who help themselves to a fast horse. Some churches are packed, though, especially early in the plague. People seeking divine intervention, making vows, begging saints for mercy. You see them prostrate before altars, weeping, promising to change their lives if only God will spare them. Then they go home and die anyway. Priests die in huge numbers. They're required to administer last rites, to hear confessions, to anoint the dying. This brings them into constant contact with plague patients. Their mortality rate is possibly even higher than physicians. Some priests flee, abandoning their parishes. You don't judge them. The same survival instinct affects everyone. But their absence adds to the sense of abandonment, of social structures crumbling. Graveyards overflow. The bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. At first, the city tries to maintain standards: proper burial, prayers, marked graves. But soon that becomes impossible. Mass graves are dug outside the city walls. Long trenches where bodies are laid side by side, row upon row, then covered with lime and earth. No markers, no individual graves, just communal pits holding hundreds or thousands. The living have to carry their dead to these pits. Families load corpses onto carts, trying not to look at the faces and make the grim journey to the burial grounds. Some can't handle it and abandon bodies in the streets instead. You've stepped over corpses on your way to patients. The city has organized collection crews to gather street bodies, but they can't keep up. Bodies lie where they fell, rotting in the summer heat, bloating and bursting, adding their stench to the pervading miasma. Dogs and rats feed on the corpses. You try not to look. There's only so much horror you can process. The government struggles to function. City council members die or flee. The remaining officials are overwhelmed, trying to organize burial details, maintain food supplies, prevent complete social collapse. They issue proclamations and edicts, but there's little enforcement. Some cities appoint special plague administrators with emergency powers. These officials coordinate response efforts, organizing burial crews, managing quarantine, distributing food to sealed houses, maintaining public order as best they can. Your city has such an administrator. You report to him weekly, providing updates on case numbers and spread patterns. He's a grim man, exhausted and angry, but competent. You respect him for staying, for trying to maintain structure when everything is falling apart. Taxes go uncollected. Courts stop functioning. Government services cease. The city survives on momentum and the desperate efforts of a few dedicated officials. But everyone can see the system is breaking. Some neighborhoods organize their own response. Local leaders emerge, sometimes clergy, sometimes wealthy merchants, sometimes just whoever has the energy and charisma to lead. They coordinate care for the sick, organize food distribution, maintain order in their small corners of the city. These neighborhood efforts are more effective than citywide responses. People trust local leaders they know. They cooperate with neighbors. Small-scale organization works where large bureaucracy fails. You start coordinating with these local leaders. They help you identify sick residents, ensure families follow your instructions, sometimes even assist with basic care. It's not much, but it's something. Relations between cities break down. Healthy cities close their gates to refugees from infected areas. Trade stops. Travelers are turned away. The interconnected world of medieval commerce fragments into isolated communities. Your city has closed its gates too. No one enters or leaves without special permission. Guards patrol the walls to prevent escape. You have a special pass allowing you to move freely, but even you face questioning at checkpoints. This quarantine probably helps, though it's imperfect. People sneak out through sewers or over walls at night. And plague was already inside the walls before they were sealed, so containment is partial at best. The wealthy retreat to country estates, if they have them. They take their families and leave the city to its fate. You can't blame them, but their absence means lost leadership, lost charity, lost stabilizing influence. The poor remain because they have nowhere else to go. Some wealthy families barricade themselves in their urban mansions, sealing doors and windows, allowing no one in or out. They have food stores, clean water, space to isolate. A few successfully wait out the plague this way. Most find that plague infiltrates even the strongest walls, carried by servants, by rats, by bad luck. Military discipline collapses. The city garrison loses soldiers to plague and desertion. Those who remain are poorly motivated. They're supposed to maintain quarantine and prevent looting, but they're as frightened and demoralized as everyone else. You hear rumors of worse situations elsewhere. cities where government collapsed completely, where anarchy reigned, where survivors huddled in their homes waiting for death or deliverance. Your city hasn't quite reached that point, but you can see how easily it could. There's a strange quality to life during plague. Periods of intense horror alternate with almost normal moments. You'll witness terrible suffering, then turn a corner and see children playing in a street, somehow untouched. You'll watch someone die in agony, then hear music from a nearby tavern where people are drinking and trying to forget. Some people respond to plague with hedonism. If death is inevitable, why not enjoy life while it lasts? They drink, feast, seek pleasure. The phrase, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, becomes literal advice. Others turn ascetic, punishing themselves, denying pleasure, seeking holiness. They figure that if plague is God's judgment, piety might provide protection. Neither approach works. The hedonists and ascetics die in equal numbers, their philosophies offering no protection against bacteria they don't know exist. You yourself just work, day after day, patient after patient. It's not philosophy or coping mechanism. It's the only thing you know how to do. When everything else fails, when hope is gone, you still have your duty. It's cold comfort, but it's something to hold on to. The city that emerges from plague, if it emerges at all, will be fundamentally different. The social structures, the economic systems, the web of relationships that define urban life, all damaged, perhaps irreparably. You're watching the death not just of people, but of a way of life, and you're powerless to stop either. 10. The breaking point. When physicians give up, it happens gradually, then all at once. You realize you don't believe anymore. You don't believe in humoral theory. You don't believe in miasma. You don't believe your treatments work. You don't believe the ancient authorities understood plague. You don't believe medicine, as currently practiced, offers any hope against this disease. The realization doesn't come with dramatic revelation. It's the accumulated weight of hundreds of failed treatments. Hundreds of patients dead despite your best efforts. Hundreds of cases where nothing you did made any difference at all. One morning, you're preparing to bleed a patient. A young woman, fever-struck, buboes already forming. You're holding your phlegm, about to make the incision, and you just stop. What's the point? You've bled 100 patients. None survived. The bloodletting clearly isn't helping. Why continue? But if not bloodletting, what? That's the thought that paralyzes you. If everything you know is wrong, what do you do instead? The woman's family is watching you, waiting. You realize you've been standing motionless for too long, phlegm in hand, frozen by doubt. You force yourself to continue, to make the cut, to let the blood flow into the bowl, because the alternative, admitting you have no idea what you're doing, is unthinkable. You begin to go through the motions mechanically. Visit patients, examine symptoms, prescribe standard treatments, take your notes. Your hands perform the practiced routines, while your mind screams that it's all useless, that you're accomplishing nothing, that you might as well be a charlatan selling colored water and calling it medicine. Other physicians are breaking too. You see it in their eyes at the apothecary, in their silences at city council meetings. The ones who were most confident early on are now the most hollow. They've crashed hardest against the reality of their ineffectiveness. Some physicians simply leave. Contract or no contract, oath or no oath, they flee. You understand perfectly. What's the point of staying if you can't help? At least by leaving you might save your own life. You think about leaving daily. You fantasize about it packing essentials, slipping out at night, riding hard for the countryside, finding some isolated village where plague hasn't reached yet, never practicing medicine again, just living simply, working with your hands, trying to forget, but you don't leave. You're not entirely sure why. Duty? Fear of shame? Simple inertia? Maybe you're just too exhausted to make such a decisive choice. So you stay, and you continue your useless rounds, and you watch people die. Some physicians cope through denial. They convince themselves their treatments are working. The patients would die even faster without intervention. that the few survivors prove the effectiveness of their methods. They adjust their theories, adding epicycles of explanation to preserve the core of Galenic teaching. Perhaps the humoral imbalance is too severe for bloodletting to correct quickly. The miasma must be stronger than usual, requiring more aggressive air purification. The astrological influences are particularly unfavorable this year. These physicians cling to their training like drowning men clinging to debris. You don't have the heart to challenge them. Let them keep their certainty. It hurts no one, and it might keep them functioning a little longer. Other physicians turn to alcohol. The taverns that remain open are full of drunk medical men, trying to blur the memories of the dying faces they see daily. You join them sometimes, drinking cheap wine until the room spins, until the horror softens, until sleep comes without nightmares. It doesn't really help. You wake with a headache and the same hopelessness, plus guilt for wasting money on wine when your family needs every coin. A few physicians have mental breakdowns. You hear of one who was found naked in the street, screaming that he was covered in plague demons. Another stopped speaking entirely, just stared vacantly when questioned. A third became violent, attacking patients and having to be restrained. You worry you're heading toward your own breakdown. The signs are there: the numbness, the mechanical movements, the inability to feel much of anything. Is this a protective response or slow disintegration? You don't know. The worst is seeing patients who trust you, families who believe in your skill, who follow your instructions carefully, who thank you earnestly for your efforts. They have faith in medicine, faith in you personally. They don't understand that it's misplaced. You want to tell them the truth. I don't know what I'm doing. My treatments don't work. I'm educated and licensed and trained, but I'm as helpless as you are. Save your money. Pray if it comforts you. Don't expect me to save your loved ones, because I can't. But you can't say that. It would destroy them. Hope is often all they have left. So you maintain the pretense, playing the role of competent physician, even as you scream internally. Some patients guess the truth. You see it in their eyes, the moment they realize you can't help them, that all your education means nothing. Some get angry. Some just look sad. A few thank you anyway, for trying, for staying, for not abandoning them, even though you're failing. Those thanks hurt worse than the anger. You start having dark thoughts about giving up entirely, not just leaving, but truly ending it. Several physicians have taken their own lives. You understand why. When your life's work is revealed as futile, when your purpose evaporates, what's left? You haven't acted on these thoughts, but they're there, waiting in the dark hours, offering a way out. What keeps you going? Barely. Is routine. Get up, wash, pack your bag, see patients, take notes, go home. The rhythm itself provides structure when everything else crumbles. You don't think about meaning or purpose, or whether it matters. You just do the next thing, then the next. And sometimes, rarely, there's a small victory. Not a cured patient, that almost never happens. But a comfort provided, a pain eased, a family given time to say goodbye. These aren't medical triumphs, but they're something. Small evidences that your presence matters, even if your treatments don't. A child asks you if she'll get better. You can't lie to her, she's too perceptive. But you can hold her hand and promise you'll stay with her. That's not medicine, but it's not nothing. An old man, dying, wants to tell you about his life, his work, his family, his regrets. You listen, really listen, for maybe an hour. When he dies that night, his daughter thanks you for giving him that time. He needed to be heard, she says. These moments don't restore your faith in medicine, but they remind you that physicians do more than treat disease. You witness, you comfort, you hold space for grief. That matters, even when cure is impossible. You're starting to understand something the university never taught you. Medicine isn't just about the body. It's about the whole person, their fears and hopes in humanity. Your treatments fail, yes, but your presence, flawed and inadequate as it is, still means something to people facing death. It's not enough. It doesn't balance the scale of all you couldn't do, but it's a handhold, a reason to keep going when quitting seems rational. Other physicians discover this too. The ones who survive plague psychologically intact, who emerge still able to practice medicine, are often those who learn to focus on care rather than cure. They accepted the limits of their ability and found meaning in smaller acts. The ones who couldn't make that shift often broke. They needed to be heroes, saviors, miracle workers. When plague revealed them as merely human, merely limited, merely ineffective, they shattered. You're somewhere in between, not quite broken, not quite whole, functional but damaged, going through motions with occasional flashes of genuine connection. It's not a triumph, but it's survival. And for now, during plague, survival is the best you can hope for. 11. The aftermath. What remains when the dying stops? The plague doesn't end suddenly. It fades gradually over months, the number of new cases slowly declining, the death toll easing from catastrophic to merely terrible to finally, blessedly tolerable. You notice the shift when you realize 3 days have passed without seeing a new case. Then a week. You're afraid to hope. There have been lulls before, respites that proved temporary before plague returned with renewed fury. But this time, the lull continues. The city that emerges from plague is transformed. Perhaps a third of the population is dead, maybe more. Entire neighborhoods stand empty, houses marked with crosses or ashes, doors hanging open, interiors looted or simply abandoned. The silence is eerie after months of death bells and crowds. Survivors emerge cautiously, blinking in sunlight like creatures from caves. They're thinner, harder looking, eyes that have seen too much. Many have lost entire families. Some are the sole survivors of households that once held a dozen people. The streets are still filthy with accumulated refuse, but at least there are no more bodies. The burial crews have finally cleared the last corpses. The mass graves outside the city walls are mounded over, marked with simple crosses, already beginning to grass over. You inventory your own losses. Colleagues, maybe half the physicians who were here when plague began are dead. Friends, neighbors, acquaintances whose faces you'll never see again. Your own family, if you had one, either survived or didn't. The thought is almost unbearable, so you don't think it. You just continue. Your contract with the city is technically still in force, but there's discussion about whether it's still needed. Plague hasn't fully vanished. There are still occasional cases, but the emergency has passed. The city can't afford to pay crisis wages indefinitely. You don't particularly care about the money anymore. The amount they paid you, once so attractive, means less now. What use is wealth when there's nothing to buy and no one to spend it with? The medical community, what remains of it, holds a meeting. 8 physicians attend where once there would have been 20. You share observations, compare notes, try to make sense of what you've lived through. The discussions are circular and depressing. No one discovered an effective treatment. No one understands why some patients survived. No one can explain the pattern of spread. All those months of effort, all that accumulated experience, and you're no closer to understanding plague than when you began. One physician suggests writing a comprehensive treatise documenting everything learned during the outbreak. But what would it say? We tried many treatments. Nothing worked. Many died. We don't know why. The treatise is never written. Some physicians can't resume normal practice. The psychological toll is too heavy. They retire or change professions or simply disappear. You understand perfectly. How do you go back to treating routine ailments, fevers, broken bones, digestive complaints after watching thousands die of plague? How do you maintain confidence in your medical knowledge when that knowledge proved so utterly useless? The patients still need doctors. The ones with minor ailments, the ones with treatable conditions, the ones who might actually benefit from medical intervention. So you try to continue. It's strange seeing patients with ordinary illnesses again. A woman with a fever who doesn't have plague, just a common cold. A child with a rash that's merely a rash, not pestilence. You're almost giddy with relief when you diagnose something treatable. Bloodletting for fever, poultices for inflammation, herbal remedies for digestion. The familiar routines of medical practice. They don't work any better than they did for plague. But at least patients aren't dying in 3 days. With minor illnesses, natural recovery is common enough that your treatments seem effective even when they're not. You slide back into old patterns of thought-humoral theory, miasma, astrological influences. After months of doubt, it's almost comforting to return to certainty, even if that certainty is misplaced. You need the structure. Without it, how would you practice at all? But something has changed fundamentally. You're less confident now, less certain of your pronouncements. You hedge more, admit ignorance more readily, focus more on comfort and care than on cure. Is this wisdom or trauma? You're not sure. Your patients notice the change. Some find you more approachable, more honest, more human. Others miss the old authority, the confident diagnosis, the assured treatments. They want a doctor who knows, not one who admits doubt. You try to give them what they need while being true to what you've learned. It's a difficult balance. The economic restructuring begins. With so many dead, there's actually wealth redistribution. Survivors inherit from multiple relatives. Land and property change hands. Labor is scarce, so workers demand higher wages. The old social hierarchies loosen slightly. Some physicians become quite wealthy in the aftermath between inheritance and accumulated fees. They have resources they never had before. You're not sure how to feel about profiting from catastrophe. The money came from treating people you couldn't save. It feels tainted, but your family needs to eat. Your debts need paying. So you take the money and try not to think too hard about where it came from. The church responds to plague with renewed emphasis on confession and penance. Many priests and monks died during the outbreak, creating a clergy shortage. Standards drop as the church rushes to ordain new priests to fill the gaps. Religious authority is questioned. If prayer didn't stop plague, what good is it? But religious faith also deepens for some. Those who survive thank God for deliverance. They make pilgrimages, donate to churches, commission prayers for the dead. Religion provides meaning and structure in the aftermath of chaos. You're somewhere in the middle, not devout, but not atheistic. You still attend Mass, still pray, still recommend religious consolation for patients. But your faith, like your medical confidence, is more uncertain than before. Marriages increase dramatically in the aftermath. Survivors seek new partners, new families, new beginnings. The church sometimes waives waiting periods and fees, recognizing that rebuilding community requires rebuilding families. You attend some of these weddings. Colleagues, children, patients, relatives. There's a desperate quality to them, as if people are racing to create new bonds before death can return. The celebrations are muted. No one has forgotten what was lost. Births follow, a baby boom as survivors try to replace lost population. You're called to more childbirths now, midwives having died in large numbers. You do your best, though obstetrics isn't your specialty. Most births go well. Nature manages on its own most of the time. Some babies are born to women who survived plague while pregnant. You watch these children carefully for signs of weakness or deformity, but they seem normal. Plague apparently doesn't damage unborn children if the mother survives. The city slowly recovers. Markets reopen. Shops resume business. Gradually, tentatively, life returns. It's not the same life. How could it be? But it's life nonetheless. Some changes are positive. Better sanitation. The crisis forced improvements in waste removal and water supply. Better quarantine procedures. Next time plague comes, and everyone assumes there will be a next time, the city will be more prepared. Better record-keeping births, deaths, movements tracked more carefully. Other changes are darker. The social trust that fractured during plague doesn't fully restore. People remain more suspicious, more isolated. The pogrom against Jews left scars in Jewish-Christian relations. The class resentment surfaced by plague continues simmering. Medical education continues, though changed. Students are taught about plague now, though what they're taught is mostly wrong. The same ineffective theories, the same useless treatments, packaged as wisdom learned from experience. You're sometimes invited to lecture at the university, to share your experiences with new physicians. You don't know what to tell them. The truth would be devastating. Everything you're learning is useless against epidemic disease. When plague comes, all your education won't save anyone. So you talk instead about the importance of care, of staying with patients, of maintaining hope, even when cure is impossible. It's not what they want to hear. They want treatments, techniques, cures. But it's what you have to offer. Plague fundamentally altered medical thought, though not in ways immediately apparent. The sheer scale of failure forced some physicians to question ancient authorities. If Galen's theories don't explain plague, what else might he be wrong about? This questioning won't bear fruit for centuries. Medicine will remain fundamentally unchanged, but plague humoral theory will persist. Miasma will be believed. Astrology will guide treatment. But seeds of doubt are planted. Eventually, they'll grow. For you personally, the aftermath is complex. You survived. That's more than many can say. You're wealthier than before, though the money tastes of ashes. You have patience again, a practice, a purpose. But you're not the same person who signed that contract months ago. That physician believed in medicine, in his education, and his ability to heal. You've lost all three certainties. You practice medicine because it's what you know, not because you believe it works. Sometimes, you see plague survivors in the street. You recognize the particular haunted look in their eyes. There's mutual acknowledgement, a nod of understanding. You survived the same catastrophe, saw the same horrors. No words needed. You wonder sometimes what would have happened if you'd fled, like so many others. Would you have survived? Would your conscience have troubled you? There's no way to know. You stayed. You endured. You failed to save anyone. And somehow, impossibly, you're still here. 12. The legacy. What plague taught that nitrogen monoxide one learned years pass? Plague returns periodically, never as catastrophic as that first outbreak, but bad enough. Each time, you treat patients with the same ineffective methods. Each time, they die at the same rates. Nothing has changed except your expectations. Now, you know you'll fail, so failure doesn't shock you. The medical profession continues as before. New physicians graduate from universities, learn the same theories, prescribe the same treatments. The Black Death, despite its devastating impact, hasn't substantially altered medical education or practice. Some physicians write about their plague experiences. Guy de Chauliac's account is widely read. Other treatises circulate. They're detailed, observant in some ways, but they don't challenge the fundamental assumptions of medieval medicine. They describe symptoms carefully, propose slight modifications to treatments, but never question whether humoral theory itself might be wrong. You understand why. Questioning the foundations of medicine would mean admitting that everything you learned, everything you teach, everything you practice is built on false premises. That's too destabilizing. Better to make small adjustments than to tear down the entire structure. Quarantine becomes more accepted. Cities develop better protocols for isolating the sick, controlling movement, preventing spread. These measures help, though no one fully understands why. Contagion theory gains ground slowly, though miasma theory persists alongside it. Better public health emerges as an unintended benefit. The crisis forced improvements in urban sanitation. City governments pay more attention to waste removal, water quality, burial practices. These changes reduce disease burden generally, though plague still returns periodically. The economic impacts are profound. Labor shortages drive wage increases. Peasants demand better conditions. The feudal system begins its slow decline. This has nothing to do with medicine, but it's part of plague's legacy. It restructured society in ways that ultimately contributed to the end of the Middle Ages. For medicine specifically, plague's legacy is mixed. On one hand, it demonstrated medicine's limits. The most educated physicians in Europe couldn't stop it. All the ancient wisdom meant nothing. That should have prompted radical rethinking. On the other hand, most physicians and scholars weren't ready for radical rethinking. The certainties of Galenic medicine were too comfortable, too established. So instead of revolution, there was incremental adjustment. Theories were tweaked but not discarded. New observations were incorporated into old frameworks rather than prompting new frameworks. Real understanding of plague would come centuries later. In the 1890s, when Alexander Yersin identified Yersinia pestis and researchers' transmission through rat fleas. Only then would effective prevention and treatment become possible. Antibiotics, developed in the 20th century, can cure plague in days if caught early. But that knowledge came too late for you and your patients. You lived in the gap between plague's arrival and humanity's ability to fight it effectively. You had just enough medical knowledge to think you could help, but not enough to actually succeed. In a way, you were uniquely positioned to suffer. A physician from an earlier era with less education might have admitted ignorance more readily. A physician from a later era with better understanding could actually help. But you, trained in medieval medicine at its peak, had the worst of both worlds: confidence without competence, education without effectiveness. Your story, the story of medieval plague physicians, is rarely told in full. Later centuries remember the beak-masked plague doctors of the 17th century, with their strange costumes and slightly better, though still inadequate methods. Your era, the first and worst plague outbreak, when physicians had no special gear and even less understanding, is often overlooked. But you were there. You tried. With all your learning, all your dedication, all your courage, you tried to fight plague. And you failed, as anyone would have failed with the tools and knowledge available in 1348. Your failure wasn't personal inadequacy. It was the inadequacy of your entire civilization's understanding of disease. You couldn't have succeeded because success was impossible with medieval knowledge. Does that make your effort meaningful or futile? You're not sure. On dark days, it feels utterly futile. All that suffering, all those deaths, and nothing accomplished. On better days, you think about the small comforts provided, the hands held, the care given. Those mattered to the people who received them, even if cure was impossible. You're old now. Your hands shake. Your eyes are weak. You've trained younger physicians, passing on what you know, the treatments that don't work, the theories that don't explain, the practices that provide comfort, if not cure. Sometimes these young doctors ask about the Black Death. What was it like? What did you learn? How did you survive? You tell them about the symptoms, the spread patterns, the death toll. You teach them standard treatments, bloodletting, poultices, herbal remedies. You don't mention your doubts. Let them have confidence as long as they can. It will be stripped away soon enough when they face their own crisis. What you don't tell them, what you can barely admit to yourself, is the deepest lesson of plague. That knowledge and ignorance can coexist. That you can be educated and wrong. That certainty is often just comfortable delusion. Medieval medicine wasn't stupid or primitive. It was sophisticated, logical, carefully reasoned from its premises. It just had the wrong premises. And no amount of logical reasoning from false premises leads to truth. That realization, more than the horror or the death toll, is plague's real legacy for you. The humility to admit that what you know might be wrong. The understanding that confidence doesn't equal correctness. The acceptance that sometimes trying your best isn't good enough. These are hard lessons. You wouldn't wish them on anyone, but they're what plague taught you, even if the medical profession as a whole didn't learn them for centuries. You sit in your study now, surrounded by your books and instruments. The phlegm you used to bleed hundreds of patients. The mortar and pestle for compounding useless remedies. The urine flask that became your symbol. The notebooks filled with observations that led nowhere. Are these the tools of a healer or the props of an actor playing a role? You're not sure anymore. Outside, the city goes about its evening business. Markets closing, families gathering for dinner, church bells marking vespers. Life continues. The dead are remembered, but also, increasingly, forgotten. New generations grow up without plague memories. They think physicians can heal, Medicine works. The world makes sense. You let them believe it. What else can you do? Tomorrow you'll see patients again. You'll examine symptoms, prescribe treatments, take your fees. You'll play the role of physician because it's the only role you know. And maybe, just maybe, you'll help someone. Not cure them. You've given up hope of that. But comfort them. That's something. It has to be enough. Because 500 years from now, when historians look back at plague physicians, they'll see your failures so clearly. They'll shake their heads at bloodletting, laugh at Theriac, marvel at the ignorance. They'll wonder how educated men could be so wrong. But they'll miss something important. You tried. With inadequate knowledge and useless tools, facing overwhelming catastrophe, you tried to help. Most of your colleagues fled. You stayed. You witnessed. You cared. History will remember plague, the deaths, the social upheaval, the end of the medieval world. It probably won't remember you specifically one physician among thousands. One life among millions lived and lost during those terrible years. But you were there. You stood in the gap between ignorance and knowledge, between the question and the answer that wouldn't come for centuries. You did what you could with what you had. And if that's not heroism exactly, it's at least humanity. Flawed, limited, trying anyway. Sleep now. Rest in the knowledge that you survived. You endured. You witnessed one of history's darkest chapters. Tomorrow will bring more patience, more challenges, more opportunities to fail and to try again. For tonight, it's enough to have made it this far. Closing. So there you have it. The reality of being a medieval plague physician. No beaked mask, no special costume, no dramatic protective gear. Just you, your medical training that proved useless, and endless waves of dying patients you couldn't save. You carried a leather bag full of remedies that didn't work. You performed bloodletting that weakened rather than healed. You prescribed expensive medicines that did nothing. You consulted astrology charts that predicted nothing. You believed in theories that were wrong, and yet you stayed. You tried. You witnessed. The Black Death killed a third of Europe. No one could have stopped it with medieval medicine. The bacteria wouldn't be identified for another 500 years. Effective treatment wouldn't exist for 600. You were fighting an invisible enemy with broken weapons. Failure was inevitable, but you showed up anyway. You held hands. You listened to last words. You provided what comfort you could. Was it enough? No. Could it ever have been enough? No. But it was what you had to give. And you gave it. Rest now. Let the distant past fade. Let the medieval world dissolve back into history where it belongs. And if you're drifting off to sleep, know this. For all our modern knowledge, all our antibiotics and microscopes and understanding of bacteria, we still face the same fundamental challenge those medieval physicians faced. We're still mortal. We still lose patience. We still do our best with the knowledge we have, knowing it's imperfect and incomplete. We're just lucky enough to know a little more than they did. A little. Not as much as we'd like to think. Good night. Sleep well. And be grateful for modern medicine, flawed though it is. Because 500 years ago, when plague came calling, there was nothing anyone could do but watch and wait and try to care for the dying. You don't live in that world anymore. But for one night, you visited it. And now you can return to your own time, your own bed, your own era where plague is curable and physicians aren't helpless. Sweet dreams.